So we're in the downstairs bed, the chamber of an original two-room chamber and hall house that was built in 1703. We know the date from dendrochronology. We also know that the paneling that you see behind me here was not here in 1703. In 1703, this room had a very simple finish. When you looked up at the ceiling, you saw the floorboards above, all the small joists, you saw all the major timbers. When you looked at the walls, you saw the posts, you saw the wall plate, and you saw probably a pretty crude plaster system where there was clay packing between the studs and the walls, and then a simple parged finish on top of that, whitewash. The paneling comes along, we don't know precisely when, but we know that the dining room was added to the south of this room in 1731. Again, we know that from dendrochronology. And we know that the paneling comes to this room after the dining room is built, and probably not that far after, because the other thing we know about it is that it was modified at the time the staircase and the parlor were built later in the 18th century. We know that that happened starting around 1769, and by the time that happens, this already has had 4 different paint colors. So it's more, I lean towards a date sometime in the late 1730s, maybe the early 40s. It's hard to imagine that the paneling goes in when we originally thought, which was the late 1750s, and then already has 4 different paint colors 10 years later. So we know that when the paneling first goes up, most of the posts around the room, the original structure of this house was post in the ground. There's no foundation, no bricks, no stone. The posts just go 3 feet down into the ground. So by the time the paneling goes up, again, probably 30 to 40 years after the house is built, the post bottoms presumably are somewhat questionable, whether they're rotten, whether they're termite eaten, maybe they're just moving around in the dirt too much. For whatever reason, all the posts are sistered with posts. In some cases, one post next to a wall post. In some cases, like under the central girder here, one post on either side. We know that happens when the paneling goes up, and that it hasn't changed, that particular dimension hasn't changed since then. Most of the things about this room have not changed since that period when the paneling first went in. It's got its basic configuration. What has changed is that from the time the new room to the west of here was built in 1715, there was a doorway here. So that doorway was here before the paneling goes in. It's here during the first, 30 or 40 years that the paneling is here. But then it gets closed in when that passageway is no longer needed after the main staircase is built. We know that there are a number of other changes that happen in that same period.